Hello, Grant Wiley here from Worthington Publishing. Today we're going to be talking about Lincoln. This is a new project being launched by PSC Games on Wednesday, May 9th, coming up in 2 days from today when I'm recording this. This is a joint venture between both PSC and Worthington Games. We're very excited about this. I'm already done a couple videos on the game, and I'm going to do even more over the next 2 days. This is the board. And I'm doing a card analysis. In case you haven't heard, this is a deck destruction game, which is much different than anything I'd played before in the past. However, it's very interesting. Going real quickly over the cards and their components. These are cards that build things up at the top. The top portion of them have direct effects on things within the game, and I'll explain these here as we go. The 1 cards with these, you can build a 1 strength army, 2 strength armies build, 3 strength army builds. This affects the blockade, which affects how many cards the Confederate player can have in their hand at any one point. You see they start with 5 cards in their hand. And as the Union blockade takes effect, the Confederate player is able to have less and less cards in his hand. The Union player also scores victory points, shown here in the hexagon on the right-hand side, for where this ends the game at. So should it end here, the Confederate would be able to have 4 cards in his hand at the end of the game, and the Union would score 2 victory points. Coming back over here, these are the European influence cards. This can lead to the Confederacy actually winning the game. It starts way up here, and if the Confederates get it here, it's an automatic Confederate victory. How it moves that way is based on losses during battle, as well as play of these cards. The Confederates also have a couple of burner cards that have no effect on anything other than combat and movement. These represents the stars in the thing are leadership points. So you can see that's a relatively weak 2. They run from 1 to 5. That's a 4, very strong. Confederates can also build forts in the game. Now, the numbers on the right-hand side of the card represent when these cards are shuffled into the deck. So on the second reshuffle for the Confederate, this card would be shuffled into the deck. Some start in the first, and some even start the game if they don't have a number on the side. The Confederate player to start the game actually starts with a stronger card hand than the Union, representing their better leadership and generally better morale in the game. There are numerous cards that have benefits. Now, we're going to talk about the deck destruction portion of the game as I go through this. The Union player has this card in his hand and wants to play it to build an army. It's discarded. Okay, it goes into a discard pile. If the Union player wants to play this card to build an army, he has to discard 1 card into the discard pile, and this card is permanently eliminated from the game. Same thing with this. To build a 3 strength army, the Union player would discard 2 cards, and then this card, the 3 strength army card, is permanently eliminated from the game. Discards get reshuffled. So the Union player plays this blockade card. He discards 2 cards. The blockade card gets permanently eliminated. The blockade track goes down this way towards Union, making the Union stronger. So as you go through the game and you play these powerful cards, they're being eliminated from your hand. The risk here for the Union player is that he has to be at certain victory point levels at both the first reshuffle and the second reshuffle of the game. Otherwise, he automatically loses. The game ends after the second reshuffle for the Union player. The Confederate player can have to reshuffle as many times as necessary. Now, this card represents movement. So, here the Confederate player would have 3 choices for this card. During his turn, during your turn you get two actions. So the Confederate player could play this card to affect the blockade by raising it 1 level, by discarding 2 cards, and this card would be permanently eliminated from the game. Or, during battle, the Confederate player could play this card for the 4 leadership value. When played for leadership value, that strength is added to your army strength. So if I had a 1 strength point army here in Vicksburg, the Union player attacks me, the Union player would play a leadership card face down. I would have to decide if I was going to retreat or stay, at which point, if I decided to stay, I could play this leadership card for the 4 value. That would be added to the 1 here, making that a 5. This card represents movement. Either I can move 1 unit along any connected railroad anywhere I want. So I could go from Vicksburg to Richmond as long as I controlled Atlanta, Savannah, and then Richmond. Or I could move 1 army, 1 adjacent space. So he could go from all my armies in an area, up to all my armies in an area, sorry about that, up to 1 adjacent space. So from Vicksburg, if I had 3 units here, I could go from Vicksburg to Corinth, Vicksburg to Atlanta, or Vicksburg to New Orleans. The interesting thing that I've found with this game is the card mix. The Union player has 68 cards. The Confederate player has 50 cards total in the game. Now, during the first shuffle, the deck, I haven't done a full analysis on that, but just breaking down the numbers. For European influence, the Confederate has 4 European influence cards. So he can take it from here to 1, 2, 3, 4, down to here within 3 spaces of victory. The Union player has 3 European influence cards. So the Union player could drive it up 1, 2, 3, but the Confederate would always be a little bit better. So the Confederate player, to win this way, it's a long shot. You've got to win some battles in order to drive it down this way. The blockade card is really a strong hand for the Union. They've got 12 blockade cards. So they can fairly easily drive it down to here, but they're burning through their deck pretty rapidly if they do, because they're discarding 2 cards each time they play this. So there's a huge risk reward in playing these. You're going to have to be judicious. You'll have to play some for their movement value. This allows the Union player to naval move from Washington, D.C. to either Fort Monroe, Savannah, or New Orleans. These are ports. See the little ship. So again, there's a real risk reward here for the Union player in playing these for the blockade. This represents the peace movement. I feel like the limitations on the Union player in their play of their cards. Now, 1 strength armies, you can build these. These just go into the discard pile. So you can build all these all day long as you have these cards. That's just a straight discard, straight discard. These get reshuffled automatically. You don't have to burn a card in order to play these. Now, the interesting thing is the Confederates have 16 1-strength cards, and then the Union has 15. So the Confederates actually have more 1-strength cards than the Union. So these will be reshuffled and reshuffled and reshuffled. The issue for the Confederate player is he's only got 11 2-strength cards, and these will be burned out of his hand. And he's got 7 3-strength card. Well, the Union has 17 3-strength card and 21 2-strength cards. So total, the Union has 38, the Confederate has 18 2 and 3 strength cards. So the Union player does outnumber them about 2 to 1. The issue, again, for the Union player is to play these 17 3-strength cards. He's got to burn through 2 cards each time he plays it. So that's almost 3 cards. So if I play this card from my hand, and the Union player always has 6 cards in his hand, and the Confederate 5, at least until the blockade starts taking effect, the Union player is going to burn 3 cards from his hand to build this 3-strength army. So you're burning through your hand pretty daggone rapidly. Again, there's a huge risk reward. The Union player has to be very judicious in the use of his cards in building the blockade and the 2 and 3 strength units. I think over the course of the game, the Union player will build his hand slowly, hopefully pushing for a big push at the end. So again, you can see this card, based on the 1 on the right-hand side, gets placed into the Union deck after the first shuffle. This card starts in the Union deck during the first shuffle. So he'll start with this card. If he doesn't play it for the 2-strength army, it'll be reshuffled and go from there. Now, there's a couple other interesting cards here. The Confederate player can build forts. These act as armies, but they're non-moving armies. But again, the Confederate player has to burn a card, discard, to do it. So out of the total hand of Confederate cards, and sorry, I forgot to bring this up, the Confederate player has a couple of burner cards here that they can just burn. They really don't have any effect. He's got one in deck one in the second shuffle, and they do nothing else other than they're burnable. They can be discarded, so you don't have to discard a good card in order to do it. That's another factor that comes into play, is which cards do you discard? You could have a great hand and have to discard to build this 3-strength army, a blockade card of political influence, and a 5 or a 4 general here. So you've got to be really careful. Total cards for the Union player, or for the Confederate player, is 1. He could burn 4, 5, and I'm just counting these off right here with you. 5 and 8, 13, and 18. He could have to burn 31 of his 50 cards, leaving him with a final shuffle, if he has to continue shuffling, of only 19 cards in his hand. And those would primarily be the 16 1-strength cards and one or two, the burner cards that I showed you. So you'd have the burner cards plus the 16 1-strength card. For the Union player, to burn his cards, he would have to burn 21, 17, 38. Really, the Union player would be left with 15 cards in his final hand, at which point the game would end anyway. So there's some interesting card play dilemmas here. If you've never done a deck construction game, this is very unique, I assure you. It was unique to me. I'd never played one like this before. I've played deck building cards, but the deck destruction aspect of this was totally fascinating, especially in so that the Union player gets stronger on each reshuffle. His cards are better. He adds more 2 and 3 strength armies. He adds more blockade. But at the same time, he's burning through cards, and if he's not at certain victory levels, he automatically loses the game. So huge decisions here on what to do. All right, I've taken the time to do a little more analysis of the deck even as I sat here with y'all. And to start the game, the Confederate player starts with a deck of 38 cards to start, and the Union starts with 47. So in the first reshuffle, the Confederate will add 6 cards, which adds 4 forts, and then 6 in the second shuffle to add 2 forts. So 6 of the 8 forts come in on the reshuffle. Now, forts are interesting in that they act as a 3-strength non-movable army. So even if you've got a army of 1 strength sitting here in, say, Chattanooga, with a fort, add 3, and a 5-strength general, all of a sudden that 1-strength army becomes a 9-strength army. So the Union's really got to come with a lot of force here. Also, some locations add defense values, such as Richmond. You can see if you move into Richmond from Cold Harbor, the Confederate player gets to add 2. Or if you move into Richmond from Fort Monroe, the Confederate player gets to add 2. So you can take a 1-strength army here in Richmond with a fort and a 5 leader. That would be 9, add 2. All of a sudden, it's an 11-strength army. Now, the European track is moved up or down based on the number of units lost by the losing player. So if the Confederates down here and the Union were to lose 2 or 3 units, it could easily end up a Confederate victory on the European track. Now the Union deck is even more interesting in that they start with 47 cards, add 10 cards in the first reshuffle. So he goes from 47 start to 57 all of a sudden. He adds 3 blockade cards, which again, the blockade, as it takes more effect, this is the Confederate hand size being dwindled, and the Union adds victory points. The second reshuffle, this is the last chance for the Union to win the game. They get 11 more cards with 5 blockade. So for each side, 75% of the Confederate forts because they get 8 fort cards. 75% of the forts come in on the 2 reshuffles. Whereas for the Union, the blockade is the huge card. 8 of the 12 blockade cards, 75% if I'm not mistaken, come on the 2 reshuffles. Now that does mean, depending on how many cards have been pulled out of the Union hand up to that point, the Union player will have a high number of cards. They're adding at least 11 cards into whatever they've got left. So at a minimum, say they burn through everything but the 1 strength units, they'd have 26 cards in the last reshuffle. And I don't think they'd be that low. So there's some very interesting factors here with these cards. Again, you can see the Confederate cards on their start deck are very high in the leadership cards, even their burn cards. There's a 5, there's a 3, a couple 1s, 5, there's a Pemberton, there's a Lee or Jackson. There, we'll make Longstreet a 3, we'll say. So it's very interesting, depending on your opinion on the general, but a lot of good leadership cards to start. So the Union has to be very careful in their battle. Whereas for the Union, they get a lot of movement cards. You can see that, but pretty on the leaders. We got 2 leadership, 1 leadership, 3. And then later on in the game, as you start doing the shuffles, the Union start adding some 3s. There's a 5. Okay, you got Grant and Thomas and Sherman coming to the forefront. And then on the last shuffle, 5, 3, 2, 4, 3. Okay, so you got some really nice leaders showing up here. That's leaders I equate just as the stars. The question is, are you going to use them for the star? Or are you going to use them to build an army? You're going to use them for the leadership? Let's see, let's find a good leader. Alright, you're going to use them for the leadership. You're going to use them to build a 3-strength army where you've got to discard 2 cards. If you play them for these things, you don't have to discard cards, by the way. I hope you figured that out. So there's... Martin Wallace has done an interesting thing with this game, guys. It's totally fascinating. It is, without a doubt, I think the best Civil War game on this level that I've ever played. And I am a huge Civil War buff. Living here in southeastern Virginia, I've roamed the battlefields. I've been everywhere: Gettysburg, Antietam, Fredericksburg, Bentonville, you name it, and I've been to it. I haven't been to any of the western battlefields. But to design a game, when I first saw the board, I will tell you that I was like, oh my gosh, this just seems underwhelming. And then when you play it and you read, as soon as you read the rules, you know this is a good game. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 points in the entire South. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in the North. So you're talking about 20 points on a board. Now each point, guys, to not confuse you, is split into 2 locations. So a Union army that attacks or moves into Cold Harbor may not capture Cold Harbor. So there could be Union forces here and then Confederate forces here in the South. So I don't want you thinking that there's 20 points on the board. Really, it's more like 40. But because if you lose a battle, your force would be... it just allows a lot of options, and where railroads come in is important. You can see Richmond. It affects whether you can retreat out of the area or not. So if the Union moved in here and the Confederate decided to withdraw and not fight, they would move back here to the south part of Richmond. The only issue is there's no railroads out of the south part of Richmond. So unless a relieving army came there, there may be no retreat. If you lose a battle and retreat, you go back to the closest connected location. If you withdraw, decide not to fight, you pull into the other half of the location. So there's some huge decisions here. The Confederates, they lose if the Union player controls Vicksburg and Richmond. The Confederate player wins if they get the European tract, which is not likely, but he put it there to keep the Union player honest. I'm going to be doing more analysis of this tomorrow. I may even be doing a play a little later today, and if so, we'll record it and show you. But I just think this is an excellent game, guys. And if you get the chance, definitely be out there Wednesday, you know, and buy this thing. I cannot tell you enough. This is going to be a huge hit, and you know, get it while you can, because I don't know on the production end of this how this is rolling out, because PSC's handling most of that end of it, and we are partnering with them. So again, this is Grant Wiley, Worthington Publishing, just with a little card analysis, breaking things down for you and just showing you the depth of gameplay here in a game on the Civil War that plays in 1 to 2 hours, is fast playing. Judd Vance says it's completely awesome, and if any of y'all know or follow Judd, you know what a great gamer he is. But great looking board, great looking components, great gameplay by Martin Wallace. He's a great designer. Guys, go out and play a game. Happy gaming, but most importantly, this Wednesday, go out and buy a game. It's on Kickstarter. I'll be posting a link on Wednesday. We'll be out, and me and Mike are going to try and come in Wednesday at like 1:30 and actually do a live play on YouTube for y'all. So I hope you give it a shot, give it a look, and back this thing. Honest Abe would want you to. That's no lie. Happy gaming.